Well, everybody, it's time to buckle in because we have another extremely long map today in Burrick Saga. Coming off the last map, there are a few cutscenes that I'm skipping through, but there's something we have to do in the middle of them. The skip drops us at this choice, allowing us to choose whether to give Kramer the Balmung. Obviously, we are doing that because that's the requirement to permanently recruit him. Next up, we have some item trading around, which isn't particularly important or interesting. What is important is what is coming up, because Dean is going to be heading to the shop, and there he is going to pick up a couple of new axes. The first of these is the broad axe, which has a small amount of crit, so it's got some interesting potential uses. But the more important one, I think, is the war pick. What this does is prevents the enemy's shield from activating at all, and that's going to be very useful for reliability at some points. In order to finance this, Sylvis sold off her treasure. So yeah, that's pretty much why I redid the previous map so much. The next thing that we're going to do is head off to the atelier, where I'm going to buy a boar pelt. The reason I'm doing this is that this is required for the College Mard that I'm slowly working towards, and that means that I now have all the pieces other than platinum, so once I get the platinum, I'll be able to instantly do it. This also means that Kramer loses his rapier, which is okay because he's got the Balmung now. Then we're going to hire Faramir because we need a really strong high move unit, and Faramir fits the bill. And finally, we're going to pick up a Thunder Orb for Percival. In order to fully recruit him, we need to have him kill a specific enemy in a later map, and so I want to kind of save the Dire Thunder a bit so that I have maximum reliability when that comes up. And so we're going to be using the Thunder Tome instead as much as possible for the next few maps that I deploy him in. Anyway, it is now time to turn to the actual map. This is, once again, my favorite, a Green Unit escape map. And on top of that, it's also Fog of War. In fact, all three of the missions tied to Chapter 7 are Fog of War, so this chapter sucks. Anyway, I'm deploying all of the usual training projects with the new addition of Enid. She is actually going to start getting experience in this map. As a reminder, she needs to reach 5 magic, and due to her tight bracketing, that means she needs to either reach level 11 to have a 20% chance at it, or she needs to reach level 6 and take the 1 liquid magic in the game. Fortunately, like Ruby, she has Paragon, so she's pretty fast to grow. Anyway, to start with this map, we are baiting some enemies out of the Fog of War using Ruby in the central row and Volo in the upper one. In the upper area, Sylvis and Faye are going to be trying to take most of the kills because they're the training projects up there. And in the middle row, we have Ruby and Enid, and of course Dean, who still needs kills because he's still a fair bit away from the 60 that he needs. Faramir's role on this map is pretty much to head towards the objectives as quickly as he can manage, because he obviously has the best combat for doing so, and his celerity skill means he has the highest move out of all of my infantry units. Enid and Faye end up being the main beneficiaries of this map's extreme length. Faye is obviously because her cutlass, being a plus weapon with crit rate, is extremely good at taking kills that she wouldn't otherwise get. And of course most of my focus in the middle area is on feeding kills into Enid because of Paragon. But Faye is the one who gets the most ridiculous amount of experience, and on this level up, she manages to proc defense again, which I'm very happy about, because as I mentioned before, I've been wanting to rig that level again for ages, and she finally got it. This does mean that she now cannot increase her defense again until she reaches, I think, level 27 or something, because of the bracketing system. So, max defense Faye, guys. Anyway, moving on, you will probably have noticed by now that there is a treasure chest in the middle of this map, just kind of sitting there in the forest for some reason. And I had a spare deployment slot, so I decided to bring Scene along to pick that up. And she's going to do that in a couple of turns' time once I manage to clear out all the scary enemies that are surrounding it. There is a third horizontal row in this map, down in the south part, and I could have brought Laurentia to send down there to start clearing that out early, but at this point I didn't actually think I was going to have to go down there for reasons that I will explain shortly. For now, all you need to know that it's there, it's going to be annoying, and there are a bunch of archers hiding in the fog down there. It's worth pointing out that because I didn't deploy Laurentia, I am going to have to loop all the way around the long way in order to get down there, so that's part of why this map takes so long. In the center of the map, there are a couple of really threatening enemies that I've had lots of trouble with, and so I am having Faramir move in because he has the best combat parameters against them with his Cutlass Plus. Meanwhile, in the upper part of the map, the next line of defense that the enemy is revealing is a pair of Overwatch crossbow guys, but they do not have 2 range, so I can disable their Overwatch completely safely with either Sylvis or Percival, because they do have 2 range and can attack without triggering the Overwatch. The threatening enemies that I mentioned have now come out of the fog, and they managed to hit Faramir, which is really irritating because he cannot take both hits. So we need to have Owen use a physic in order to get him back up to speed. Otherwise he risks death. And to be completely honest, Faramir risks death way too much over the course of this map, so it's good that he didn't have to here. Unfortunately, I'm not the only one with access to healing on this map. There is a Raised Priest sitting down in a pretty tricky to reach area, and he has his Darkman spell, which, as I have complained about before, has 5 range and heals way too much. So I want to make sure I kill these enemies as quickly as possible so they don't get healed. Now you'll notice here that Percival could have attacked to finish off one of these Overwatch guys, but I chose not to do that because I am trying to be judicious about not taking kills with my non-trainee units unless it's absolutely necessary to complete the map. I do not always succeed at this over the course of the map, but here I did, and I think that kill is going to end up going to Faye or Sylvis. Now, the sword guy is so scary to me that I decided to have Dean go for a pretty low percent hit. It's more likely that the enemy will hit Dean than Dean hitting the enemy, but I do it anyway and it pays off because that's going to allow me to finish that guy off with a desperation hit. We can now see one of the gimmicks of this map. There is a new area of fog vision for us around one of the enemy fortresses, and that's because an enemy unit just spawned there who is dragging along one of the prisoners that we are trying to rescue. This is an interesting way to represent this. It's done presumably because this game doesn't have Thracia style capturing mechanics with the rescue mechanic as well, but it's really interesting and it does mitigate some of the bad things about Fog of War. There are 4 prisoners who appear in this way throughout the course of the map, and they spawn in a staggered fashion, so that kind of puts a limit on how low our turn count can go on this map. Now, both of my big combat units in the middle, Faramir and Dean, took quite a beating on this turn, so we're going to get Owen in there to give them a bit of healing, and I know this is terribly boring and obvious, but this is a long video, so I'm going to be pointing out every little detail that I can use to drag out the time. Yay! Content! Faramir should be advancing here, but he takes a moment to pause and miss a guy. He was trying to chip that guy down for Enid, but Enid is going to have to find a different prey on this turn because he failed to do so. So instead, she ends up going for the Imperial Gunner down blocking the chest, and she starts out by missing, which isn't ideal, but then she more than makes up for it by dodging and getting a critical hit, which wipes the guy out in a single blow and gets her first level up. So she has a 20% chance to get magic, which of course she doesn't get, but that's okay because she has plenty more levels to do so. And now we open up the treasure chest with Zine and we get an amalgam, and this is important because amalgam is used to make a repair stone at the atelier, and that's the only other repair stone I'm going to have access to throughout this game. So if I want to use Brim Ranger or the Cutlass or Cutlass Plus very much, I'm going to need to pick that up. Hopefully I find the last ingredient at some point. I tried to break Overwatch using Percival, but he does what he does best, which is miss. So unfortunately I'm forced to use Sherpa instead, and I forgot to equip the longsword rather than Brim Ranger, so obviously he gets hit there. But that doesn't matter too much, we managed to work around it, and Faye absolutely goes to town on the crossbow guy afterwards, getting a bunch more experience to her name. I actually spend a decent amount of time here trying to chip down this enemy mounted unit, but that guy is a super pain in the ass, and he's going to prove to be even more of a pain in the ass in a moment, because he is going to run away well beyond my reach and use a concoction to erase all of the damage that I've managed to deal to him. And then he's going to be able to pop out and snipe at me from where he hides, so it kind of sucks that I didn't manage to finish him off, but never mind, you get what you get. In the middle, there's just the axe dude that Faramir failed to deal with Enid's help last turn, but we do have to sort him out here and now, which I do by first chipping him down with Ruby. She stays where she is after the combat in order to prevent this guy from going for Owen, because Owen is extremely fragile and he cannot take 2 hits. In fact, there are some enemies on this map who one-shot Owen, which isn't pretty. This guy isn't one of them as far as I remember, but we still don't want him hitting Owen. So instead he goes for Faramir, and then we put him down by having Dean roll in and use a desperation attack. This means that we now completely control the middle of this map. There is still the matter of the raised priest who is running around with his 5-range healing, but he doesn't have any offensive orbs, so he's no threat at all, and all I have to do is wander down and deal with him at my leisure. There are more Overwatch guys hidden in the fog up on the cliffs defending the forts, but I know that they're there, and this allows me to roll Faramir in to trigger one of them to attack. And because Faramir is dodgy, he manages to avoid taking damage and attack back. And this allows me to deal with this guy with the Overwatch round followed by Faramir's actual action. So that's pretty nice. I guess it just goes to show that surprise tactics don't really work when your opponent has the power to restart the battle without your knowledge at any time. Up at the top of the map, I am trying to wait out the enemies who I want to move out so I can spring my trap upon them. However, they are not falling for it. They're going to wait as long as they can to avoid having my trap sprung on them. And so in the end, I'm only able to get one of them in combat this turn. And that happens because he's very attracted to attacking Percival, who is unable to counterattack at 0 range. But this means that he ends up in range of Faye using Sunder, and that means that she has a really good critical rate, which leads to this guy's very timely death. So Faye gets even more experience, creeping ever closer towards level 10. And we have reached the start of turn 5, so save point time, yay! So I've dealt with most of the enemies that are off the defensive positions up atop the cliffs, and now it's time for me to figure out a way to punch through said defensive positions and deal with all the guys up there on the forts and stuff. There are a couple of very scary enemies up there, and one of those is mobile. So we're obviously going to send Faramir up as our vanguard in a moment. I move Faye into this strange seeming position because this sufficiently blocks off the enemy mounted unit from reaching Percival, and that forces him to go into Volo instead, which is a much more favourable matchup for me. Now, I mentioned before that this map is a green unit escape map, but the green units are currently under the control of the red units, and we don't want the red units to be the ones escaping with them. So we have to kill all of the red units holding the green units in order to drop the green units onto the map, and then the green units have to escape under their own power. Ideally, we would get the red units to drop the green units after said red units have taken their movement, since the green unit's turn automatically ends when they're dropped, but I'm not good about doing this. So Faramir has now rolled up the cliff and started engaging with the enemies up there. They're mostly not very accurate against him, so he's fairly reliable at it, but unfortunately he does get hit sometimes. And there's one very accurate enemy up there, and that is the guy up the top using Battle Cry over and over. And he's basically the whole reason why I deployed both of my 2-range units in the top zone. There's also the armored dude who is now attacking Faramir. This guy has a very strong shield as well as high defense, and he is more or less the entire reason why I decided to buy the war pick for Dean, because most of my other options for breaking through aren't very reliable. Man, having done that bit of damage makes it so aggravating when the goddamn Ray's monk decides to heal him. So yeah, I was not a very happy camper at that point, so Dean is going to have to pull some wondrous stuff out of his ass here. Anyway, we want to finish off the enemy horsemen with reliability, so I had Silvus choose the Steel Arrow Plus to kill, even though the enemy actually activated his shield. So good job, Silvus, thanks for that. And now I need to move carefully around the enemy sub-boss. His name is Hazridge, and he's pretty scary. He's fast, and I believe he has Adept, which isn't fun. So Percival needs to not get in his range, and so I have to leave the enemy archer alive for now. And instead I have Sherpa attack Hazridge and deal lots of damage because Sherpa is always reliable. The result of this is that Hazridge then moves to attack Volo instead of Percival, but this actually ends up with Volo getting hit, which is a shock, but fortunately Hazridge doesn't kill him, and this leaves Hazridge in range for Silvus to then move in and take him down with a very high accuracy attack, courtesy of the sniper arrows. So that's one pretty nasty threat dealt with. So Silvus picks up another level here. I didn't comment on it earlier, but she actually got defense on her first level in this map as well, so there's a lot of defense levels going around here. There's a guy here who has Deadeye, but that makes you so inaccurate that he really doesn't matter. And then, bafflingly, instead of going for someone, the other archer decides instead to go into Overwatch mode, despite the fact that he's already surrounded with people who can melee him to death. So, good job, that guy. So, despite what I said earlier, Dean isn't doing all that much damage to this guy with the war pick. That's because this guy does have very high natural defense as well, and this aggravates the problem of him getting healed. Though I would like to point out that without the war pick, Dean would have been doing pretty much 0 damage if that shield had activated, so this is still an improvement. We heal up Faramir because he's been getting hit way too often, and he needs to reliably survive, especially since he is immediately attacked again. But this was a mistake because this Overseer ends up getting max damage crit through his shield, dropping him down to 1 hit point. And this ended up being a tempting enough proposition that I diverted Enid from going after the Raised Monk, which was my initial plan, into having a go at trying to kill the Overseer instead. Now, it doesn't work out because he activates his shield and Enid doesn't do damage through his shield, but she's going to have another go next turn. So at this point, I'm pretty much judging that the situation in the middle is under control, and Faramir is instead going to head to the south in an attempt to get started against the defenders down there. I want him to try and get started on the enemy archer, who is now able to attack Enid, but he fails me by missing several times and wasting several steel arrows, so thanks a lot, Faramir. He does redeem himself somewhat by chipping down the archer who was newly revealed down in the south. And now, instead of having Ruby head to the south to help Faramir out like a sensible, smart player would have done, I have her just sit around and do nothing in particular. So I don't remember why I did that, and looking back, it was a dumb idea. I'm not good at this game, guys. I'm really not. We're now trying to deal with the remaining archers in the north. Volo attacks one to get rid of his overwatch, and then Sherpa is going to move across and chip down the other one for Faye to finish off afterwards. Volo does his combat from a pretty dangerous spot right next to the battle cry overseer, but we have enough to range to shut that guy's battle cry down before Volo is in any danger. Percival contributes here as well, doing a bit more chip damage to the surviving archer. And then the goddamn raised priest uses Darkmend on the super high defense guy again, which is extremely frustrating. But more kills for Faye is not frustrating. In fact, it's very, very good. So at this point, it is the start of turn 7, and that means that another enemy holding a green unit is going to appear. But this time it's a pretty important green unit. This is General Abas, and he is basically the entire reason why we are here in terms of the story. He's a big deal. He's a general as well, and the downside of that is that he has a meager 3 movement compared to the 4 movement that the other green units have. And because of that, he is basically the limiting factor in how fast this map can be cleared. I believe in order to get the absolute minimum turn count on this map, it is important to free Abas from his captor as late as possible in the map. In other words, when he is 2 spaces away from the escape point, because the unit dragging him around has more movement than he does. So that's a tricky thing to pick up on, and indeed I did not pick up on this while I was doing the clear. So I lost a turn from that, which is unfortunate, but not to the level where I would want to redo this entire map just to fix it. There's more to come about stuff that I didn't realize about this map, but I've glossed over a bit much. So we noticed that Enid got a critical hit to finish off the boss right back when I started this little spiel. She actually got a minimum damage critical hit, which is absolutely hilarious when contrasted with the maximum damage critical hit that Faramir got to chip him down to 1 HP in the first place. I thought that was amusing. Anyway, back to actual tactical decisions here. Faramir is moving down to chip the enemy who is holding Abas. We need to do this one way or another because we want to be able to kill this guy. I would still have done this even if I'd been aware that I wanted Abas to be carried as far as possible. This chip allows pretty much anyone I choose to finish him off later, and in this case it's going to be Ruby for that bit of experience. Now, the next important thing going on is that I'm finally sending someone to deal with the Darkmend guy. Unfortunately, it is Zine, who has pretty bad combat. She does have Kanwenhao, which is a plus weapon, and it has base crit, although not very much. And so either of those could go off to deal with this guy faster, but instead what's going to happen is that Enid is going to pick up this kill. It's a pretty good kill for her to get, and it's very safe. Zine, because of her low damage output, is pretty much the ideal unit to chip the guy down for Enid. Now, instead of sending Ruby down, I once again distract her by letting her have a go at the Darkmend guy, but she manages to miss. which I've come to accept is just what Ruby does. So there's still a few things that we have to deal with at this point. The Battlecry boss is still alive and kicking up the top, and we're going to have to deal with him shortly. But more importantly, we need to open up the seize point by taking out the main boss of this map, and he is going to get Sherped. Sherpa is easily able to one-round KO this guy with Brim Ranger. I believe that even if he got shield 3 times in a row, Sherpa would still get the kill, but he doesn't shield at all, and so Sherpa is able to finish him off even though he misses once. Now, the archer down below hurt Enid, and therefore Dean decides that he must die. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the wherewithal to do it in one hit, but we're going to deal with him over the course of the next turn. Volo, on the other hand, is no longer safe to remain next to the Overseer with only 1 HP, so he is going to have to back off at this point. And it would have been really nice if Sylvis had managed to hit this attack, because her offensive parameters are actually pretty much exactly ideal here. She would have one-shot the guy if he hadn't activated his shield, and if he did activate his shield, she would have chipped him down just enough for Faye to easily finish him off, shield or no. But annoyingly, neither of those hits happened, and instead we have to lean on Faye getting a critical hit, which, because she's on fire, she does. And speaking of being on fire, Faye gets an absolutely incredible level up here. She gets HP and strength and speed all in one, and that combined with the defense level she got earlier means that she's been ridiculously blessed on this map, and I absolutely love it after struggling with her level ups for a while. Anyway, moving on from that, at the start of turn 8, the 3rd prisoner spawns into the map, and at this point I am absolutely terrified for Enid's life because there are 2 enemies near her who can attack her and kill her off. And because of this, I am going to leave her exactly where she is for an unconscionable period of time. I decided to free up the prisoner here because he is unable to counterattack at all, but is still capable of taking 1 hit, which is more than Enid can. So I now get a little bit indecisive about what to do next, but you'll notice that none of what I consider is move Enid the hell out of the way, because risking my unit's lives is good tactics, right? What I eventually decide to do is have Faye move down and attack the enemy soldier who just spawned, and she manages to proc Adept and finish him off in a single round of combat, so that does ease the pressure on Enid a little bit. And then I finally get around to actually making her a bit safer by having Owen come down and heal her up a bit. Now, I still have not managed to break through down to the south, because I need to get through there in order to rescue a bus at some point, but we got into a stalemate because I had Faramir with a bow equipped. He is going to try and run around in order to get after a bus, but he gets overwatched on a cliff, and because of that he gets hit and forced to stop. So that's a little frustrating, and it means that once again Faramir is on low health when I need him to be moving ahead as a strike unit. So, yay. So Ruby is going to come down here instead and try and get a crit with the Killing Edge, but she is not nearly as effective as Faramir would have been with the Cutlass Plus, and she manages to do her usual trick of repeatedly missing. So, yeah, thanks Ruby, you're the best. I mean, it's so annoying because Ruby is all around a pretty solid unit at this point, but she still manages to be disappointing at the worst possible times, and her combat feels way worse than Faye's or Sylvis's, or sometimes even Enid's, because Enid at least has the Lady Sword to her name. So, come on Ruby, please. Now up the top, I do need to leave a couple of units in order to deal with the final prisoner, who's going to be appearing at the start of turn 9. But that's not going to take all that many units, so some of the guys up there can start moving down to kind of help out where possible. In particular, I am going to need someone who's not otherwise occupied to be next to the siege point, ready to finish the map as soon as the green units all escape. Faramir has to cheat death one more time at the end of this turn, but you know, he's done it before. He's pretty dodgy. I don't like to rely on this sort of thing, but if it happens, it happens. And he does dodge, and it is now finally the start of turn 9, which means that the last prisoner has finally spawned. And Faramir is now free to move past the Overwatch guy and use his Cutlass Plus to declog the one tile-wide choke point and allow Ruby to run through and free Abbas. And now is probably a good time to admit that I was confused and misinterpreted the objective of this map when I first looked at it. So what it says is free all of the prisoners and then either escape all or seize, which in my mind meant we just had to kill the enemies carrying the prisoners and get them to spawn in as green units, and then I would be able to seize and finish the map. But that, as I have already elaborated on, is not correct. The green units do have to escape at the far end of the map in order for either the escape tile or the seize option to become available. And this was pretty frustrating when I finally realized it, because I've gotten into the habit of not finishing maps completely before starting to record them. And so this came as a complete surprise mid-recording when I got to this point and realized that, whoops, I actually am not able to seize. So I had to very quickly rethink my strategies as I was staring at the screen that you're currently looking at. And I have to admit this was pretty demoralizing, realizing that I wasn't going to be able to hit the turn count that I really wanted, and instead had to deal with the rest of this very long map. But I think I managed to scramble out a solution fairly quickly, which is helped by the fact that this objective isn't actually that difficult at this point. Sherpa once again runs into an Overwatch range, but fortunately he has the longsword equipped here, so he doesn't lose his action, and he's still able to whip out his Brim Ranger to deal with the final Overseer once and for all, leaving only a handful of resistance on this whole map. So now my focus turns to helping the green units reach the escape points as quickly as possible, and for the upper ones, it is absolutely trivial to do so, because I have already cleared out their entire avenues of escape on my way down them. There are a couple of enemies remaining, as I just mentioned, that could pose a threat, and additionally there are reinforcements that spawn from the far end of the isle here, but the red units prefer to go for Percival for some reason, which I'm happy about, and the reinforcements do not spawn until after the green units have already escaped. At least in this clear, I'm not certain what exactly triggers them in general. The problem, however, is Abbas, who is down in the bottom row, and he needs to deal with an area that I have not yet gone through, which contains 3 archers who are perfectly capable of standing where he needs to go, and thus causing him to lose turns. And so the remainder of this map's strategy is pretty much entirely devoted to dealing with those 3 archers with the limited resources that I have at hand down there. And one of those is that I have to rely on Faramir, even though he is on very low HP. He is able to counterattack these archers, and apparently he can parry with a longbow, and this allows him to start getting to work chipping them down. We're also trying to finally put down the Raise Monk between Szene and Enid, and Szene manages to land all of her hits, but unfortunately in a moment Enid is going to miss hers, which is going to delay this kill for a while. But luckily, He is now trapped with no other enemies within his healing range, so he is completely pointless and neutered for the remainder of the map. I intended to attempt to use him to rig a magic level up on Enid using the turn 10 save point, but in the end, rigging Faramir's survival turned out to be the more important thing. Now, I, for some reason, decided to move other units first rather than moving Sherpa with the Broom Ranger out of the way of the archer that he's still quite close to, because Sherpa is probably going to have to support Faramir and Ruby a bit, and to do that he needs his health, but it didn't end up being a bother. It's just a minor optimization that I completely missed. So, there are now only 2 enemies remaining on the left-hand side of this map. There's an archer at the bottom, who Dean is going for, and there is an annoying lance dude at the top, who has been continually attacking Percival. And Sylvis just failed to kill that guy, so guess who the experience from that is going into? Yep, it's Faye. Faye got a ridiculous amount of experience from this map, and she's going to end it very, very close to level 10, which is absolutely amazing and means I don't have to deploy her all that much in upcoming maps. Back in the lower right, Ruby takes one of the archers down there out because he got chipped by Faramir previously, and the other one is going to move around a bus, letting him get his full required movement, and goes for Faramir. So once again, Faramir is courting disaster, but he dodges and he also misses, so the enemy archer needs to be dealt with by Sherpa instead. But Sherpa, of course, is very reliable and makes short work of the guy. Faramir at this point is going to pull back towards Owen in an attempt to get him healed, but I fail to count tiles properly, so that doesn't happen. Enid picks up her second level here, finally dealing with the Raised Monk, and once again she fails to get magic, which is disappointing, but at this point it's not the end of the world. And Dean is moving down to deal with the final enemy on the left-hand side. That guy had activated Overwatch, but Dean manages to casually dodge, and he can finish the guy off with his Francisca thanks to Desperation. And there's absolutely no reason not to use Desperation here, because there are no more enemies that Dean is going to have to fight. So, yay! So there's exactly one enemy remaining on this map, and he's hidden away in the fog of war near where Ruby and a bus are, and he is going to be a right pain in the ass. But we'll talk about that a bit more later. So now we see why I miscalculated with Faramir, because Owen needs 2 movement in order to cross a fort tile, and so he can't use his full 3 movement, which I counted out. And that means that Faramir is going to have to wait another turn for his visit, meaning he's going to be pretty much out of range of anything useful. Now, my training projects, Enid, Faye, and Sylvis, are heading back the way they came, following the green units back down the aisles, and they're doing this because I intend to have them kill some of the reinforcements that are going to spawn once the green units escaped, which I mentioned earlier. Other than that, there's really not very much left to talk about in this map. So let's talk about another potential turn save that I identified after finishing this map. So I obviously had Ruby kill the guy holding a bus before he moved, because I wanted to get him dead on turn 9, because that's what I thought the objective was. But if I had waited until after he had moved, a bus would have been 4 tiles closer to the escape point, which, if I had killed the enemy after he moved onto the space that is 2 tiles away from the escape point, could potentially have saved an extra turn in addition to the one from letting him get to that point in the first place. That guy does move fairly late in the order, so I'm not sure on the feasibility of this, but it's worth investigating. And it does show that there was a lot of stuff that I could have done better on this map. Anyway, we have now exposed the final archer between a bus and the escape point, and Ruby managed to deal no damage to him by missing. So we need to position Ruby fairly carefully so that the archer doesn't move into a position where a bus is blocked, and fortunately I chose well because he doesn't move at all. However, this does mean that I am not able to bring Sherpa in to attack the archer at this point, because a bus is going to move into that space right next to the archer, and Sherpa would therefore have blocked him. Because the green unit AI in this game, I have found, tends to be pretty rigid on where it's going, and so I feel like if that space was blocked, a bus would just stand there instead of going to the other tile that is equally close to the escape point, because green units are really dumb in this game and I hate them. To be honest, I'm not completely sure if that's accurate, but based on what I've seen of a bus's movement patterns, I think it's fairly likely, and it was something that I really wanted to avoid. I have Sherpa use the guard skill on a bus here just to give him something to do. I don't think there is any possible reason for me to do this other than just it being there, but that's okay. And Ruby finally manages to actually put some damage on the archer. As you can see though, she is not 2-hit KOing, and so we're still going to have to deal with him next turn, which is super frustrating. The other green units are now getting to the escape points, and you may be wondering how they factor into the turn saves that I've mentioned, but if you'll remember, I didn't exactly free them optimally either, and so because of that, it's pretty likely that they would still be able to escape before or at the same time as a bus, even if I minimized the turns it took him to reach the escape point. We're now at the turn 15 save point, which is really good because I want Ruby to get the kill on the final archer, and the only way she can do that from where she is standing is to rig a critical hit from the killing edge with pretty poor accuracy. So now that I've spoiled that for you, this map is finally basically over. The enemy archer dies, and then Abus pretty much immediately moves to make his escape, and that means that I can now seize at my leisure, and all we're waiting around for is getting as much experience as we possibly can out of the reinforcements that are hiding in the darkness. Now Percival is going to chip this guy down for Enid, because there's absolutely no way that he is going to miss two 70% Dire Thunder hits in a row, right? Right? Yeah, so that happened. And that means that unfortunately Enid isn't going to be getting any kills in this last turn, which is sad because she still has some way to go and she still hasn't gained any magic. But even though she gets a critical hit, she's not getting that kill. But you can't have everything, and Enid did do pretty well overall in this map. So now all I'm doing is stalling until the upper reinforcements come out of the fog and get whacked by Silvis's Overwatch, which neatly puts one more enemy in range to be killed by Faye. And that brings this obnoxiously long map to its long-awaited close. There are no more enemies that are able to reach Faye, although I did still have Owen wait, getting my hopes up for a moment, but sadly it doesn't happen, and instead all that's left for us to do is have Bolo seize to complete this chapter in 15 turns. See you next time.